So these heat waves that are impacting Canada and Europe, what is this telling us?
Well, it's telling us that these events are being made more severe by climate change, which is predicted and confirmed by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the authoritative body of all things climate change. So over the last 20 to 30 years, the predictions have been that we will experience more extreme heat around the world. And that's certainly here in Canada, where Canada has already warmed by 2 to 3 times more than the global average.
Now, these extreme heats that are coming through, how are they impacting our food resources, our farms, our livestock, things like that?
So when you look at multiple factors, these events are getting worse. So you have extreme heat, which causes drought-like events, which is obviously we're seeing drying out of the drying out of crops, crops not growing. And this is already amplified by supply chain issues. And so this is a major problem for the agricultural sector.
Now, this unprecedented heat wave going through Europe, we're seeing temperatures of 40 degrees Celsius moving through England, an area that's usually covered in rain and clouds, and it's usually a little cooler. Could we see something like this in the same regions of Canada with a similar weather pattern like British Columbia or our Maritimes?
So what I could say is that, yes, when we look at multiple factors, climate change is irreversible. So we're not going backwards. So these types of events, such as extreme heat, they are only going to get worse over time. So over the course of the next 30 to 40 years, we're going to see a doubling, a tripling, and even in some areas, a quadrupling of hot days per summer that exceed 30 degrees Celsius. So right now, if I use Montreal as an example, you have about 11 or 12 days that exceed 30 degrees Celsius. By 2050 to 2060, that will be approximately 54 days that exceed 30 degrees Celsius. And the maximum daily temperatures for cities across Canada over the next 30 years, that's going to go up by about 3 to 5 degrees. So maximum daily temperatures in Toronto right now are 36 to 37 degrees Celsius. Over the next 30 years, that's going to go up to 42 degrees Celsius. Now, if I was to pinpoint specific regions across Canada, I would say South Central British Columbia in low-lying areas from the West Coast to the Rocky Mountains, southern regions of the prairies along the US border, and the North Shore of Lake Erie to the St. Lawrence River Valley in Southern Ontario and Quebec. And just to highlight, that's where most of the Canadian population resides. So specifically in urban centers, which face the greatest risk because of the urban heat island effect. So this is areas where urbanized areas experience higher temperatures, 10 to 15 degrees higher than surrounding areas, because you have buildings and roads. So it's that cement that actually absorbs that heat and keeps the heat in the system rather than, say, natural infrastructure or natural landscapes such as water bodies or a tree. That's that tree canopy that will actually help reduce temperatures in urban areas.
So how should we be preparing for this? What can first of all the government do, or a majority of people who are watching do, excuse me, to help reduce or slow down this factor? And for those who are just, everyday people, everyday citizens, what can they do to help reduce the effects on themselves while we go through this situation?
Of course. So Canada's on the right track when we're looking at climate change. And that's not just for extreme heat. I'm talking about flooding and wildfire. But we need to put programs in place much more rapidly to mitigate that risk. But for extreme heat more specifically, it's behavioral. So behavioral adaptation needs to be put into place. So when we're looking at those who are the most vulnerable, so the elderly, specifically the elderly who live alone, we need to be able to map out where these individuals live, and we need to check on those individuals when an extreme heat event is occurring. those experiencing homelessness, we need systems in place to check on these individuals, make sure they're hydrated, make sure they have access or can get to cooling centers. People with pre-existing conditions such as asthma, provinces and territories need early warning systems so that these individuals can be better prepared. Within cities themselves, we can work with nature better. So we need to retain and restore natural infrastructure and landscapes. So we need more trees in urban areas because it's that tree canopy that actually helps reduce temperatures. From an infrastructure perspective, there's a few things we can do. You can add green roofs, so adding trees and plants to roofs, or even painting roofs white. And what this does is it diffuses or reflects the sun's energy away from these surfaces, so away from high rises and it's that cement, it's those dark surfaces that usually absorb that heat and keep heat in the system. If we have green roofs or paint those roofs white, we're actually reflecting that heat away and back into space. Also, from an infrastructure perspective, we need to make sure that buildings have backup power generation. So if there is a major power outage during an extreme heat event, then fans, air conditioning, and water keep on flowing, and air conditioning and fans keep on working. And we also need to think about air conditioning as a fundamental human right. So if we're looking at heat in the wintertime as a fundamental human right, we also need to start looking at keeping people cool during the summer months, because these events become lethal. And we can look at what's happening in Europe right now. The numbers are in the thousands of people that have died, and I'm assuming those numbers are going to continue to grow. When we look at the heat dome in British Columbia last year, 619 people died. When we look at the extreme heat event in Quebec in 2018, 86 people died. So extreme heat is different than floods and fires because you have a high amount of people that die when these, so it becomes very lethal when we start talking about extreme heat.
Essentially very unavoidable.
Yes.
I wanted to shift over to the other side of climate change when it comes to winter. I know it's hard to think about right at this time with the high heats that we're experiencing, but when it comes to these ultra cooler temperatures, climate change doesn't just mean warm temperatures. What can be expected, or what can we experience with climate change in our winter months?
So what we can expect is that again, we will experience more extreme. So when we look at the World Meteorological Organization, again, when I'm speaking about deaths here, when you look at flooding and wildfire, those deaths are actually decreasing because of early warning systems. But when you look at extreme temperatures, so it's not just the extreme heat, it's extreme temperatures, which can be extreme cold, you see those numbers increasing. And so there will be regions that will experience extreme cold temperatures that maybe have never experienced cold before, but you will be seeing warming. Warming is where we're going. So you will see more warming in the system even during these cooler months. What I can say is that look at the events that happened last year in British Columbia. You had the heat dome effect, which dried out everything. Then you had one of the largest wildfire seasons on record. And then in November, December, when precipitation starts coming, you then start having flooding and mudslides. Basically what happens in the system is you dry out everything, it becomes kindling, it lights up, it becomes a wildfire. And then in the months passing that, the soil itself actually, which normally absorbs water, actually can no longer absorb and actually rejects water. So then this is why then flooding and mudslides will start happening. So you're correct in saying that extreme cold is going to be an issue and a danger, but what I look at is that it's actually going to be the flooding and the mudslides that are going to happen because of these the events that are happening in the summertime, which is the drought-like temperatures and the wildfires.
It's really an interesting future. Doesn't look too positive at this point, but I really hope that we can at least slow the process over the next coming years, from this point of view at least. Is there anything that you'd like to mention about climate change, these heat waves that we haven't already talked about?
I would just say that, and this is climate change in general, again, going back to what Canada is doing, Canada, we have the information, we know what to do. And so people, when we have these conversations, it's very doom and gloom and it is very scary, but we have mechanisms in place. We've done the research. We know what to do. We just need to be able to deploy it faster. We need to put these programs in place much more rapidly to mitigate this risk. So we do know what to do. So that is a positive to take away from this. We just need to do it much more rapidly. And I think these heat waves in Canada and in Europe is really showing that we need to put measures into place now.